It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I want to start with you. I wish we had a fancy theme music to go along with our predictions this morning, like the big guys, but it's an incredible election, probably the most interesting midterm election that I've seen. And you both have agreed to make some courageous predictions. And I'd like to start with the state of Maryland. Let's just go through the list. And if Al could go first, and let's start with the governor's race, Al. Wes Moore versus Dan Cox.
I think that's going to be the easiest choice we're going to have to make all day. It seems to me that Wes Moore will win. He'll probably win by a resounding number, probably 2-1.
And Craig, do you have a different point of view on that one?
I agree, and I think Wes is going to launch himself into not only governor of Maryland, but probably a larger national figure as we go forward. He's an impressive candidate, and of course he had Hogan casting his support in that direction, which tells you what kind of a candidate Dan Cox is.
And then for me, I think one of the more interesting races in Maryland is the comptroller. Brooks Learman is against Republican Barry Glassman, but Glassman has not endorsed his own party's governor's nomination or candidacy, and has made it a point to say that he's still a true Hogan Republican. I don't know if that really changes the results of a Democratic state like Maryland, but Al, what's your take?
I suppose that it will make the race closer than the governor's race, but I don't think it's going to change the outcome. I mean, Glassman got the endorsement of the Washington Post, which will help him a little bit in Montgomery County, probably. But the reality is a Republican is not likely to win Montgomery County. So I think Brooke Learman will safely be elected, but her margin will be probably maybe even significantly less than Wes Moore's.
Right.
Barry Glassman's a fine candidate. He's an excellent administrator. He has obviously experience in the state legislative body here in Maryland. But I concur. I think he probably can't get over the hurdle of being a Republican, even though a more moderate Republican in this race. And so I agree. I'd give it to Learman.
And then for Attorney General, we have Anthony Brown versus Michael Pertolka. Maybe I mispronounced that name. Michael has been on the extreme right, along with his governor candidate, Dan Cox. Any chance of a breakthrough there, Al?
I don't think so. I mean, Anthony Brown is he's former lieutenant governor. He's won statewide, and with both the governor and the attorney general being African American, it's going to be an historical occurrence in Maryland, and I think Anthony Brown will romp to victory.
Craig?
I would concur with that. I think recent polling suggests Brown's got a pretty comfortable margin. I suspect that won't change by election day.
Let's get into the first district. I think a lot of people are giving Heather Mazur credit for one of the best campaigns in recent history in the first. She's going against incumbent Republican Andy Harris. We know throughout the last 8 years that the first district has been almost scientifically created in a lab to make sure it's a secure Republican seat. Any chance, Al, that Heather can pull this off?
I suppose there is a slight chance, but the problem is that the tide in the country is it seems to be very strongly moving toward the Republicans. This is a Republican district. I just find to me, I mean, Andy Harris is one of the first people I'd like to see removed from the House, but I don't vote in the first district, and I think the voters in the first district will probably return him, even though it may be a closer race than it might be expected.
Greg, what's your take?
Well, I think he probably, Andy Harris probably has this one locked. If it was any kind of a district that was divided in a fair way, it might be a close race. I think Andy Harris goes back. He is a McCarthy supporter, and should the Republicans capture the majority, Andy Harris would be in the majority party. That would be new for him. He doesn't have a reputation of accomplishing a great deal in Congress, but maybe if he's in the majority, he'll do a little bit more, and certainly he'll be held to account for that 2 years down the road, should he choose to run again.
You know, the Washington Post came out this morning with an interesting essay on the 6th district in Maryland, David Trone versus Neil Parrott. It's closer than I thought it was going to get. Al, you're closer to that district than we are. What's your take?
Well, I'm closer to that district than you are, but I'm not in that district. This is a race that has been viewed as closer by Charlie Cook and other national, or the Cook Report with Amy Walder. Charlie doesn't do it anymore. They've had this race as a closer race than others. My guess is, though, that David Trone will prevail.
And Craig?
Yeah, I think David Trone prevails. He put $12 million of his own money in this race early. Republicans haven't really gotten behind the Republican in the race. It's interesting to speculate that it's closer. Had we maybe had a different kind of Republican, it might be more closely contested, but I think Trone probably returns.
Okay, we're done with the easy part. Now we go on to the Senate. And these are going to be tough calls for all of us, but let's start with Pennsylvania, Al, and John Fetterman versus Dr. Oz.
You know, we've said all year that that midterm elections are usually a referendum on the incumbent president, and that's always resulted in or generally, with very few exceptions, resulted in big losses for the party in power. And this year, certainly all the fundamentals and the issues that are most important, the economy, inflation, crime, and immigration seem to be are issues where the Republicans are strong. Democrats, as we said, have tried to shift the election to freedom and abortion and preserving democracy, as President Biden did in his speech last night. What seems to be happening was over the summer, it looked like the elections were going to be a lot tighter. But what seems to be happening in the last month or so is the fundamentals seem to be coming back to the fore. I think they probably, in the end, will prevail. I think just overall, I think that that's going to help the Republicans, but it'll probably keep it a closer race. Pennsylvania is one that I've expressed my concern all year. I've just thought that Fetterman was not a particularly strong candidate for Pennsylvania. He's got the benefit of Mehmet Oz, who is not particularly well liked, and this may very well go down to being voters picking the lesser of two evils. My guess is, in the end, Oz will probably eke it out.
Okay, and Craig, do you agree with your colleague here?
Actually, we finally found a point of difference, but it's razor thin. I think that I agree with much of what Al said with regard to the electorate. I think the electorate has been maybe less engaged than people thought they would be. Those that are engaged tend to be more concerned about the economy and inflation, even though there have been some positive economic reports. That message just doesn't seem to be getting out. Those issues are perhaps having more impact in some of these races, other races we'll talk about, than in Pennsylvania, than the abortion issue, where a lot of money has been spent, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily benefiting Democrats. In the Pennsylvania race, you know, this state is going to see some heavy hitters coming into the state. No one is going to elect Mr. Fetterman because of his ability to give speeches in the Senate. I do think that he will actually could eke this out because his vote's going to be so important. And this is a place where I think Pennsylvania voters will go ahead and vote for a Democrat. Had Republicans offered a stronger candidate, I think this seat could safely have been in Republican hands. But this is again a case where, for whatever reason, a stronger Republican did not make it through the primary. It's probably too close to call, but I would I'll sign up for Fetterman for this race.
Okay, now we move on to Georgia and Reverend Warnock against football player Herschel Walker. Al?
This is a baffling race to me. Herschel Walker just doesn't seem to have the qualities that you'd think people would accept in a United States senator. He just doesn't seem to be up to the job, but he's running even or even a little bit ahead. I've talked to people in Georgia, and they say the headwinds. There are two things that are really that are dominant. One is the headwinds of running against Joe Biden, in the sense that Biden's approval rating is low in Georgia, and that is hurting Warnock. It's really hurting Stacey Abrams in the governor's race. And then the other thing that was in the Wall Street Journal did a big poll recently, and well, it wasn't just Georgia. It talked about suburban women making a big turn in the last month. And if that's the case, I suspect Georgia, and this will be a cop out, but I think it's going to go to a runoff. Georgia has to have you have to win 50%, and just as it did in 2020, I think these races in Georgia, this race in Georgia, will go to a runoff. And I think it's hard to predict the runoff because it depends what's at stake. You know, if the Senate is at stake, then it may be different than if it's not when the runoff occurs.
Craig?
Yeah, I too expect a runoff. I think, you know, under any definition that I've known in the past, Herschel Walker would be simply disqualified as a candidate. I mean, and his problems seem to get worse, not better. So I think it goes to runoff. I think Warnock pulls this off in the runoff, in not only because Walker's situation gets worse, but because I think Democrats in Georgia have a huge get out the vote effort. We haven't talked a lot about that yet so far, but that's going to be key in most of these races. And I think that's what would put him, Warnock, over the top in a runoff, if not in the general election.
Moving on to Ohio, we've talked about this extensively over the last 9 months or so. Tim Ryan versus J.D. Vance. Al?
I think this is a case where Tim Ryan has proven himself to be the far superior candidate, but Ohio is also a state that voted for Donald Trump by 8 points and has been moving more Republican. My guess is Vance will eke it out, but I think this is one where we might see an upset in the end.
Does that mean you're
if I had to pick, I'd say that Vance will win by a point or two, but I would not be surprised to see Tim Ryan eke this out in the end.
Okay, we'll have to put you down for Vance though, right?
Okay, yes.
And then Craig?
I actually think, as I suggested, I think a week ago, I think that the JD Vance may be underestimated a bit as a candidate. Tim Ryan's campaign against him has been just voracious. He is and ferocious. He has attacked him in a closing campaign ad that's not a voiceover, but actually shows Tim Ryan sitting at a bar. His closing statement, and this is a man who spent decades in Congress and in public office. His closing statement to sum up his campaign is, "I'm an ass kicker, not an ass kisser." Yeah. I quote what came out of his mouth. This is the kind of campaign that he's running. He looks to me desperate. You know, he has been there a long time. We talk about public support for the president, but the public support for members of Congress is even lower. So I think Ryan's got issues, working against him. I've been watching the race and certainly watching the way that it's closing. It's not particularly impressive, and I think I have issues with JD Vance. Could have been a stronger candidate, but this is a young man under 40 who's very motivated, and he's proven himself to be successful in the things he's undertaken. I think he's going to pull this out.
Let's move on to Nevada, Cortez Masto versus Adam Laxalt, the grandson of the former senator of that state. Al.
This is another toughie because I think Nevada has been very hard hit by inflation. The economy is, has been slower to come back in Nevada, and the other key thing in Nevada is a big Hispanic vote, and the trend in Hispanic vote has not been particularly good for the Democrats over the last 6 or 8 years. I guess the other thing I'd say about Nevada is it's a state where Biden won, but he won by a small amount, and the Democratic support over the years seems to be decreasing a little bit. I guess I'd say Laxalt's going to win this race.
And Craig?
I think this is one where the Laxalt name is going to carry the day. I think Adam Laxalt wins as well. It's a pickup opportunity. It's close, but for all the reasons Al said, and especially the way the economy as an issue resonates, I think tilts in his favor.
Moving on to Wisconsin, I think we all knew that the former President Obama was there a couple of days ago. Mandela Barnes versus Ron Johnson, the Republican. Al.
The point you make about Obama going there is really is interesting. Obama's been terrific in my view on the campaign trail, but it's also telling, and this tells you where the Democrats think things are, that Obama's going to the tough battleground states and Biden is not. I mean, Biden was in Florida where it's unlikely that the Democrats are going to really be competitive in the end. And Biden is trying to make the bigger arguments, which are important and I happen to agree with, but I don't think we're going to carry the day. Wisconsin is a very sad case for me because I think Ron Johnson has deported himself as a senator in a way that doesn't deserve re-election. But this is a case, again, where the Democratic candidate, I'm sure a decent guy, Mandela Barnes, is just a weak candidate for statewide and has had a past on the progressive side that has made him vulnerable to Johnson's attacks. So this is a state that I think Democrats should have had a pickup, but I think Johnson will eke it out.
And Craig.
Yeah, I see Ron Johnson heading back to the Senate. I think for all the reasons Al mentioned, and I think it's also a case where these slashing attacks are having an effect on the opposing candidate, and that's what we've seen there. So I put Johnson in as a likely winner.
Moving on to Arizona, astronaut Mark Kelly versus Trump-supported Blake Masters. Al.
Another really tough election. I mean, Kelly's had a lead the whole way. It started to shrink. In the last week, the Libertarian candidate has pulled out, which I mean, I'm not in Arizona. I haven't actually talked to people in Arizona, so you know, I don't know how that'll impact it, but probably more than likely it'll help Masters a little bit. But I believe in the end, Kelly will hold on by the skin of his teeth.
And Craig.
So I think, you know, Arizona is a state we're going to study to see what world is going on with election deniers on the ticket, in some cases leading. But I think that Mark Kelly is one of those stable forces who probably holds on. It's gotten close, but I suspect at the end of the day, he'll be back in the Senate.
And finishing up on the Senate, we go to North Carolina, Sherry Beasley versus Ted Budd, the Republican. Al.
Well, this is a race in a state, again, that in 2020, Democrats expected to win a Senate seat. They lost. Polls had Biden up, I think, by a couple of points going into the race, and Trump won that state. It's a Trump state. Budd has led the race the whole way. I suspect he'll win that Senate seat.
And Craig?
Yeah, I think it certainly leans Republican. I think Ted Budd takes the seat. Again, it's a case of, I think the economic and crime issues are prevailing here, and the abortion issue isn't going to do as much as Democrats thought it would. So I see Ted Budd winning.
You know, before we leave Congress, I wish I could, I hope I can get some of your impressions about where we're going to be with the House of Representatives. Al, are we going to see a significant majority from the Republicans this time around?
I think we'll see a majority from the Republicans. The number, you know, I don't think it'll be as great as it might have been. It might be in an ordinary year for a couple of reasons. One is that there just aren't as many competitive seats. So unless it is a tsunami, which is possible, but I don't think it will be, the Republicans will gain seats. I'd say they'd be in the range of 225 to 230.
And Craig?
I think it certainly looks like Republicans will take the House. Probably in a future show, we'll talk more about that. I think Kevin McCarthy already, it's pretty clear, will have his hands full as Speaker, with factions in this Republican caucus, you know, pulling and pushing in different directions. I'll put it that way. You know, Republicans also have a challenge in that suddenly they will have control at least of the House, maybe of the Senate. But with that comes responsibility, and they have a very steep hill to climb, especially with President Biden in office, with the veto pen out, to achieve some of the things they're suggesting they want to do. So I would say a Republican majority that, when they say they're going to get organized fast, I'm not sure they're going to accomplish a great deal very rapidly.
And as we close up, I think we're all kind of fascinated by the race for governor in New York, Kathy Hochul versus Lee Zeldin. This was, you couldn't imagine a more blue state than New York. Things are getting very close. Al, what's your take at this point?
My take is that Kathy Hochul will win. It won't be as big as she would have liked. But one of the things to remember about that race is that she was not really a very well-known statewide figure. She was lieutenant governor, became governor when Andrew Cuomo was forced out. So she hasn't really had to run a statewide campaign. Clearly, the issue of crime in New York has become a monumental issue. It dominated the mayor's race, even though obviously a Democrat won. And I think in the end, New York is probably a little bit too blue for Sullivan to win, but it'll be closer.
And Craig.
I'd put Hochul in the win column, but I will say this: I think this is a place where a lot of the uncertainty turns around voter turnout, and if she can't motivate the voters to come out, she will have even a closer contest than one might have thought. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why this has been tightening. And I think we should say voters are very frustrated. They're going into this race really very much in fear of the economy, even though there are some brighter lights. They worry about crime, and honestly, the message at the national level with President Biden's speech last night didn't provide much clarity, saying that democracy is on the ballot. I think spending the first part of his speech talking about this horrible home invasion at Pelosi's house was, for those who watch the speech, they don't stay with it that long, and going through this horrible account of a crime. I don't know. I just don't know what the strategy was, other than I think the president decided he wanted to speak out on behalf of a friend. So the messages, to my mind, on the Democratic side have been mixed. And to the extent that abortion was looked at as an issue that was going to deliver a lot of voters in overwhelming numbers, I just don't think that's going to pan out.
Al, in closing, I was hoping that you all could summarize how this election will go down and it looks like you all are predicting a significant Republican evening on next Tuesday. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I think, I think what's going to happen is this is going to wind up being much more like a normal midterm, with the dimensions maybe not being as great as the averages. In that sense, that the fundamentals are going to prevail, and that's going to help the Republicans as the out party. One of the things that always happens, as we go through some of these races, some of them, like the Pennsylvania race, where I think Oz will probably win, and Craig has picked Fetterman. They're really going to be decided in the suburbs of Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, and likely by suburban women. And so my guess is that that's going to be dominated by the inflation issue, and that will probably be the case in these close races across the country. But the other thing that happens in these elections is there's always a surprise, and something that you're just not expecting. And I want to throw in two possibilities, one on each side. One is Washington State, where Patty Murray is going for her 7th term. That's a long time to be in office. And the Republican candidate, I don't even know who she is, but seems to be running a pretty good race. The other is in Iowa, where Chuck Grassley is 103, not 103, he's in his 90s. He's running against somebody named Franken. And while he's been ahead, and 538 gives him a 95% chance of getting elected, he just doesn't get past the mid 40s in the polls. And so I would not be stunned. I guess my conclusion overall is that the Republicans are going to win the House. The I think they probably will gain a seat in the Senate, but it could wind up 50-50. And we're headed for 2 years of extreme chaos in this country. There's some bad things that are going to happen, in my view. We're going to have an election deniers probably running the state of Arizona, which is an important swing state. I think the candidate in Nevada for Secretary of State, which controls election, is an election denier. So I think the Republicans will do well on election night, and the country is going to be in for some real chaos over the next 2 years.
Greg, you have the last word.
So, I think after the election, and by the way, we probably won't know the outcome completely on Tuesday night, but after these election results are known, we're still going to have a very divided country. One of the recent polling numbers I saw was striking. It was talked about Biden's approval was at 43%, but inside that poll, 81% of Democrats approved and only 9% of Republicans approved. And it just tells you how the nation is divided along these partisan lines. And the independent voters tend to be more concerned about the economy and crime. So they also have a low approval of Biden, although it's above 9% to be sure. I just think it makes it very hard for the president to govern. And if Republicans hold both the House and Senate, as Al suggests, we will have a chaotic situation, even if only the House is controlled by Republicans, because the investigations will be launched. And while I think the public tires of that, it seems to be the way things get done in Washington. If you can't legislate, you investigate and hope that you can get attention that way. And so I don't hold out much hope for legislative activity. I do think that President Biden will have his hands full, and I personally think we'd be better off if he didn't run for re-election and he worked to try to forge some success in his second 2 years of the first term. But we'll have to wait and see. I noticed. I think more people will call for that as they see little happening in Washington. Kind of a dismal forecast for us optimists, but I think we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us for sure.
Well, we have to leave it there. We have a lot to unpack next week, but until then, Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you very much indeed.